And I also want to thank HBO Documentary Films, John Hoffman, and Sheila Nevins, of course. There's a history with Vito and HBO, Common Threads, also directed by Rob and Jeffrey, which was also featured Vito about the AIDS quilt from 1990, was an HBO film, and as was the Celloid Closet. So it seems like it's really come full circle. And I want to thank my mom and dad, who are right there. And finally, thank you, Vito Russo. As we were editing this film, it seemed somehow that Vito knew that this would happen one day, because he left behind all the building blocks that we needed to reconstruct his life and to tell his story. So this is Vito's story, but it's also the story of his generation. And there's so many of you here tonight who are close with Vito. It's because of the work that Vito and the men of his and women of his generation did that we can all be free. So I wanted to thank you all again for being here. And we'll be here after the film for some questions. Okay.
Hello, good evening. Thank you all so much for being here. I know that there are, I'm sure, thousands of questions from the audience. I will start our Q&A with a few questions of my own. I have many. Jeffrey, you said in your introduction that Vito seemed to be a person who was quite the archivist himself and left many records that would make it easy to tell his story. But one of the really fascinating things about your documentary is that there is so much great archival footage in it, and I'm thinking particularly here of that phenomenal rally at Washington Square Park with Sylvia Rivera and Bette Midler. Could you talk about how you found that and how much time went into finding everything that came together to make this film?
First of all, it's a great honor to be here at the New York Film Festival. Thank you again for having us. And I have to say that it all started with working on the Celloid Closet, Rob Epstein and Jeffrey Friedman's film. I'd read the Celloid Closet when I was coming out. Vito had just passed away. I came out in about '91, and I had heard that Rob and Jeff were going to be making a film about it, and I said, I want to come out and sweep the floors or do whatever you need, and they said yes. And then HBO came on board to produce the film with them. So it was during that period where I got to know Vito the activist, because I knew his work as a film scholar, but Rob and Jeffrey had collected all this material and had interviewed Vito, and that's what makes up a bulk of the film. I mean, all those interviews with Vito are either from Common Threads, or from pre-interviews they did with Vito for Common Threads or for the Celloid Closet. So I guess it was just a word of mouth, hearing about things that existed, looking at other documentaries. Arthur Dong's Outrage 69 also had some of that footage and told some of the same stories. And I don't know, it's watching a lot of other documentaries, really, and working with libraries and archives in New York, LA, San Francisco. So this stuff is out there. But when we would find something that was a miracle, we would all jump for joy around the office, and then of course with Philip we found a way to incorporate it into the film.
And my next question is for Phyllis and Charles. You speak so poignantly about the films that Vito loved, and I want to know, what films didn't Vito like? Did he had many passions, but were there any actors or movies that he just said, oh, this is terrible? I'm sure he must have been as passionate about his hates as he was about his loves.
I'm so out of my comfort zone with the brainiacs on this panel. I find it, I get so emotional even now when I even think about Vito. He was so special to us, so my heart gets in the way of my tongue. I don't really recall Vito having idols, and he was just so intent on, when he got involved with finding the injustice of the homosexual depiction in movies. I don't remember him really having an idol or a pin-up or anything of that sort, if that's what you mean.
Did he have anybody on a dartboard?
No, that's what I'm thinking.
Jesse Helms.
Someone. But I'm not surprised, because I was the official babysitter of Charles and his brother, because I was 9 years older.
Ronald Reagan was an actor.
So I was just at the right age, so I became the babysitter, and Ann, who was my mom's younger sister, we were really friends. She was my confidant, and so I was really very close. And I just want to say Vito's despising injustice so much. I remember, if I'm allowed to take this much time,
Oh, please.
being his babysitter. His dad had painted the apartment once, and for some reason, Vito was left unattended in the house, and he got locked in the bathroom because of the wet paint. And in his attempt to open up the window, he dropped a glass bottle of ammonia. He was being asphyxiated, and in his swift mind, he was only 8 or 9, and he broke the bathroom window. And of course, when his dad came home, he got somewhat of a beating with Charles' plastic bat. And so
Charles.
Vito, when the next time I babysat, he wanted to go and buy OTAD because he made a poster of his dad wanted for brutal assault with a lethal weapon. And he was only a small boy. And I said, Vito, how did you know those words? And he said, I saw a wanted poster in the post office. Someone was wanted for beating and assault with a deadly weapon. And he proceeded to get an OTAD and draw a picture of his dad and wrote wanted. And he said, I don't care about the physical abuse. It was just unfair. I was in survival mode, and I got hit for trying to save my life. And when I watch this, I think, my God, that childhood experience was so, it was just natural for him to grow up and fight these injustices. And I know I'm talking long, but I want to just say that Jeffrey Schwartz and the intensive research and the love and the devotion. And I'm so happy to see Vito's old friends all here alive and well today. It does my heart good, and I'm just honored that you have me on your panel today. Thank you.
After seeing the film, and I always get emotional, and I've seen it a few times, I think I'm going to go home and check our records, because I think he was triplets. He was everywhere, my brother. And I would like to say this. I want to thank, of course, Jeffrey and his incredible staff. They were just so wonderful through this entire process. I want to thank HBO. I want to thank the New York Film Festival. I really do. HBO, it's wonderful having them on board, because this is going to reach the mainstream, and it really needs to reach the mainstream. One thing I want to say is Vito was very fortunate, because he was sort of the perfect storm. He had a loving family who supported him in a time when it was a very difficult time, where young men and women were being thrown out of their houses and disowned. So he had a very supportive family. And then he was very fortunate, because he found his close gay family, Arnie and Larry, and I just want to, for me to be up here and Larry Kramer to not be up here is just an injustice. Larry, I just want to say this to you. So happy to see you here tonight. But this is the year of Vito, with the book out about Vito that Michael did so wonderfully, and the only thing I would like to mention is one of the things that, again, I said this once before, that jumped out of Michael's book. There was an early GAA meeting, and there was some arguing back and forth about politics in terms of changing laws. And Vito says, I know we have to change laws, but he said if we really want to change people and change their hearts, we have to do it through the media with positive images. And just to see this now, Vito's having his wish. So thank you all for being here, and it's wonderful.
Vito's relatives, we can shut up.
There's a lot of them here. Many. So.
And Arnie and Michael, could you just say a few words about Vito's development as an activist from the GAA through GLAAD? I guess it's roughly a 10, 15-year period.
I met Vito early in the beginning of GAA, after the first 2 or 3 months. We both joined it. We became fast friends immediately. He lived a few blocks away from where the meetings were, in a church on 9th Avenue. And we would all go to his house afterwards and watch movies, of course. Especially if they had Judy Garland. He was very about that. There were pictures of her.
I wish I'd been there.
In every room in the house, including the bathroom, there were pictures of Judy Garland. he developed into a special kind of activist because of his love of film. And he created these film nights. But what we were learning from Vito was what it meant to be a gay audience, what it meant to see things through our own eyes without having to filter it or transfer it from the mainstream. I think all minority groups do that. I'm sure, black people do that with white heroes, and gay people certainly, when they see love on the screen, have to translate themselves into the beloved of the hero or the female hero. And so it grew from there. In the first year, the first parade of gay pride in 1970, we had a week of gay pride events, and he showed Gold Diggers of 1933. I'm going to lose my credentials. And it brought people together in a whole new way. And this is the genesis of what became the Celluloid Closet. He started capitalizing on how people reacted. He started collecting film clips, not always legally, by the way. He would show films with his lecture without permission. He had asked for permission and got a no. So why let that bother him? And it grew from the lecture into the book eventually, and I think I described in the film what it was like watching him try to create a book before he was ready to. He would get dressed every morning and sit down at this typewriter. We were in Water Island, and he was on the deck, and he would sit there for about an hour staring at the typewriter, and then he would get up and go play.
It's the sign of a great writer. All great writers do this.
Well, eventually he realized what he had to do, and he did it. He did an immense amount of research, traveling. He lectured all over the world. And he brought this subject to consciousness. There had been a couple of smaller books before about gays in the movies, but they didn't have the scope or the depth or make the points that he made. And maybe Michael wants to talk about how current generation of gay scholars reacts to all this. No.
Actually, for me,
You're not on, then,
is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. What's most remarkable for me about Vito's activism is that he, for someone who was at Stonewall, he was out of the fray for a long time. He was very afraid of what he saw at the Stonewall riots. He said at the time that he really, like many of his friends in the village, he only cared about going to the bar and having a great time and finding a kind of liberation in the village, that there didn't seem to need to be any more than that. And then, as Jeffrey does a wonderful job of showing, he got to GAA and realized that he could participate in the movement through movies and really galvanize people's attention and interest and make them feel much more comfortable when it was so difficult to be out in 1970 and to be screaming in the streets. And the wonderfully brave people like Arnie Kantrowitz and a number of people who are here tonight who were our forefathers, absolutely, and foremothers, who were willing to go out and be so goddamn gutsy when it took incredible courage. We really should never forget that. And Vito, yes. But Vito also was very practical about this and realized that not everyone had that courage or those opportunities. So he slowly started to realize how people could be brought into the movement through fun, through the film and dancing and cabaret. And then what's also important to recognize is that, the gay rights movement in the late 70s into the early 80s, prior to AIDS, was kind of dying. There was a tremendous lack of energy as it became more corporatized. You had groups like National Gay Task Force, and they did wonderful things, but it wasn't the same kind of grassroots fervor that there had been back in the GAA days. So Vito, in publishing the Celluloid Closet in 1981, had an enormous impact in kind of channeling anger from the community of people who were so, through his lessons, so outraged at what they were seeing on the screen, all these images of us as nothing but clowns and victims and villains and killers and psychopaths and suicides. And he was the first person to really articulate that this was so unfair, and this had everything to do with how we were being stigmatized in society. And then, to get back to your question, as AIDS came into play, and there was such incredible hostility toward gay men in particular in New York City, that he and Arnie and 6 of their best friends put together GLAAD. It was like this heroic resurgence of the gay rights movement that it had not, with an energy that it had not had in almost 15 years. So I hope, through Jeffrey's film and my book, that people really recognize what Vito did to bring gay rights back on the map.
Absolutely. I just have one last question, then we'll open it up to the audience. Philip, this I guess is a question for both you, Philip, and Jeffrey. You are working with an extraordinary amount of material. Like you have this incredible footage of Vito himself, and then all these clips from the Children's Hour, the killing of Sister George, and then interviews with Vito's colleagues and family. What was the process like of putting this all together?
Well, it was a very long process, of course. It was just hours and hours of footage. 59 interviews from all of the loved ones who knew Vito. I always sort of felt we could make 10 movies about Vito Russo. We could make 20 movies about Vito Russo and all of this history. It became clear from the beginning we needed to focus it on the sort of 3 periods: gay liberation, the Celluloid Closet, and then Vito's AIDS activism. And it was just a process of combing through the interviews, combing through the archival, and slowly bringing it down to, we started with a 3-hour cut and then got it to the cut we have. I think our main focus all along was that Vito was a guy who believed in himself from the very beginning, who lived by what he believed in, and that he was right. And we really wanted that to come across most importantly.
And it does. Thank you. Did you want to add anything?
Oh, no, Philip said it very well. I think, we did have a long cut, and we realized that there's just so much history that we couldn't tell the entire story of the gay liberation movement from Stonewall to ACT UP, that we would have to take shortcuts, and if it didn't directly relate to Vito or his experience or something he personally saw through his own eyes, then it had to go. So there's always the DVD. If there are still DVDs in a year from now.
We would love to take your questions.
There's a wonderful thing called fair use now, and a lot of documentary filmmakers are employing this. It's part of copyright law. We did license much of the footage that's there, but the studio film clips, which are prohibitively expensive, as Rob and Jeffrey can attest to from the Celluloid Closet, there's been a change in attitude toward clearance, and there are legal firms that specialize in assisting documentary filmmakers to employ short excerpts of copyrighted material, which is perfectly legal in documentaries like this. So we're very, very grateful for Michael Donaldson, who's the lawyer who is who specializes in that. It's really it's changed everything. Really has. We couldn't have made this. Rob and Jeffrey can attest to it. Every one of their clips from the Celluloid Closet had to be licensed through the studios. Every single actor had to be cleared. It was kind of a nightmare, right? So we didn't have to deal with a lot of that. So things have gotten better for documentaries like this.
Other questions? Yes, way in the back.
Arthur Bell, the Village Voice columnist, wrote about gays in Hollywood also, and he was Vito's best friend. And he helped start the movement against the shooting of Cruising. Could you talk about Arthur's role and his friendship with Vito?
Yeah, that's another thing. We had we have you, Brandon. We had a lot of people talking about Arthur Bell. Arthur Bell was Arthur Evans's partner, and they were early members, first of Gay Liberation Front, I think, and then Gay Activist Alliance. I mean, this is just one of those things. I mean, the whole story of cruising, that's something that I assumed we would have in here. You know, and Vito was not for censorship. Cruising was, I don't know how many people have seen it, but it was a film made in '79 that was set in the whole leather underground world. It was about a killer in this world, and the gay community, Arthur Bell in particular, who was writing the Bell's Tales column for the Village Voice, found out about the movie, and they decided that they were going to do everything they could to make it as difficult as possible for that crew to shoot the movie because they thought it was a negative portrayal. And but Vito sort of stood on the sidelines of that one. You can attest to that. He didn't believe that they should stop anyone from making a film, that they should, when it comes out, scream and yell and respond to it in a responsible way, but not to stop anyone from making a film, because he felt our enemies would basically do the same thing to us. So it's a very interesting story, and again, just for runtime, we weren't able to include that.
So,
May I just say there were so many aspects and people that were in Vito's life that maybe were not portrayed in the movie, but then they should read Michael's book.
That's right.
That were just probably too lengthy to put in here.
Well, I was doing 300 pages, not 90 minutes, so it was easy.
Everyone should read this book. I love the book. It was just a happy coincidence that you had started working on the book while we were starting to work on the film. So go buy it. It's in bookstores now.
Well, thank you for the plug. If I could just say one other, in response to Brandon's question about Arthur Bell. One thing that is kind of lost to history now, and it's a shame, is that Vito and Arthur did a column together called the Russo-Bell Connection, which was done for the New York Native in 1981, basically almost the whole year of 1981. And there had been some talk of collecting those into a book if it had lasted, and it's a tragedy that it didn't happen, because it's this brilliant commentary of these two on the phone every week, gossiping about New York. But it's more than just gossip. I mean, it's a lot of film talk, and it's a lot of real gay history of New York City. And when you read it now, it's this perfect cross-section, it's this perfect overview of what was going on in gay Manhattan at that time. So I talk about it a lot in my book, and it's also at New York Public Library. If you get a chance to read it, you really should.
We are collecting that material and all of Vito's writings for a book as well, so keep an eye out for that.
well, now I'm curious. So after Cruising was released, was Vito raising hell?
Oh, he loathed that movie. I mean, I don't know. You can attest to that.
Yes.
Have to read the book.
You got to read the book.
No spoilers here.
They were also shooting Can't Stop the Music with the Village People at the same time. And the
high
protesters
masterpiece.
they accidentally protested Nancy Walker instead of It's true.
We have time for one last question. Yes, way in the back. I think, is that Jim?
Yes.
Yes, it is Jim.
You know, I could sit here and pick apart this and that about the history that you've told, and it's not important. First of all, most of us alive are still in this room, and we will fight amongst ourselves. But what your film did and what your book did was show the Vito that all of us loved, and he loved all of us. And that gay spirit is what young people will see coming through this film. So I thank you, Jeffrey. I thank you.
Well, there's really not much more to add to that. I thank you all very much for being here, for your fantastic film. Thank you all so much for your time. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here.